When the Constitution was written in 1987, it was this. Yeah, I drink from a sippy cup. Welcome back to Politics for People. I'm Jimmy Fremgen. This weekend marks the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. So in honor of the marchers then and now, today we are talking about the right to a peaceful assembly, otherwise known as peaceful protesting, in 10 minutes or less, or more. To get started, I want to read you something I read this week. Officers may face charges after the shooting of unarmed protesters this week. The incident occurred after a nonviolent confrontation between a neighborhood watch group and an officer escalated after the group began throwing objects at officers on patrol. Following calls for backup, law enforcement responded with a show of force, resulting in the death of several of the rioters. Witnesses from the scene have claimed that one of the rioters killed was leaning on a stick when shots out. However, law enforcement has indicated that officers only opened fire after that individual directly struck an officer over the head with that piece of wood. Let's back up a little bit. When the Constitution was written in 1987, when the Constitution was written in 1787, it was woefully inadequate for day-to-day life, and the founders knew it. It was designed to establish the machinery for an effective federal government and contained very few individual rights. It only really gave rights to landowners and included some famous bullshit about people only being worth 3/5 of a white person. Jefferson wrote to Madison this same year to tell him about it and to insist that not including a Bill of Rights was a failure on their parts as founding fathers. Madison would later be part of Congress and went on to introduce a Bill of Rights in Congress in 1789.
I had the Bill of Rights, which I wrote,
which did go on to include the First Amendment, which is where we'll focus today. It said, "Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." Here is another example of a peaceful protest. As protesters arrived to her speaking program, local police and the group of counter-protesters blocked access to the square where the program was scheduled to begin. Upon attempting to breach the security perimeter, police declared the protesters part of a riot and utilized riot control techniques that included baton strikes and other physical restraints. Following the incident, many of the women alleged to reporters that they witnessed protesters and personally experienced being repeatedly groped and verbally harassed by officers during the dispersal process. So, what's the court say about peaceful protest? The Supreme Court has considered peaceful assembly on numerous occasions, and the good news is it continues to uphold Americans' right to assemble peacefully. However, the court has also gone on to say that it is not an absolute right. The court ruled in 1969 that a government may not prohibit an assembly at its own discretion, meaning that if you get the wrong person at the window that day when you go to get your permit, you can't get kicked out or banned from protesting just because that person doesn't like you. On permitting, governments can require that you get a permit in advance, and they can ask for more information about the protest and stipulate how you're going to conduct your protest. The right to a peaceful assembly goes away as soon as there is, quote, "a clear and present danger of riot, disorder, or interference with traffic on public streets, or immediate threat to public safety or order." This is where we get the term an unlawful assembly. California Penal Code 407 defines unlawful assembly as two or more people assembling together for the purpose of doing something illegal, or to do something legal, but in a violent, boisterous, or tumultuous manner. One more clip. I promise this is the last story I'll tell you. This one from a protest today, August 29th in Los Angeles. After a brief, non-violent confrontation, officers declared an unlawful assembly and cleared the crowd from city streets. Officers nearby responded to a potentially related report of two armed men inside a bar and cleared the building with tear gas and non-lethal projectiles. A 42-year-old, unarmed man sitting at the bar with a friend was struck in the head by one of these projectiles and later died of his injuries. Now, let's wrap up what we were talking about with unlawful assembly. It's defined as two or more people assembling together for the purpose of doing something illegal, or something legal, but in a violent or disruptive way. Sound too broad? The California Supreme Court actually agrees with you and has limited the scope of which a police department or law enforcement can declare an assembly unlawful. They say that it can only be applied to prohibit assemblies which are violent or which pose a clear and present danger of imminent violence, and I'll drop the links to some of those sources below. The court further stimulates that you must knowingly participate in illegal activity. You can't get arrested, or let me rephrase, you can get arrested, but you cannot be charged if you didn't know what was happening was illegal. Now, let's go back to these three protests we read about. I have to come fully clean with you. Just because it happened on the internet, it didn't necessarily happen. These did, but they didn't happen today. The first story I started with, the man that died in that story was a man named Crispus Attucks, and he died 250 years ago as part of the Boston Massacre, when American, or rather British colonists challenged the police that were there. They weren't police, they were British redcoats. The unidentified objects that they were being hit with later turned out, according to some historical accounts, to be snowballs. That didn't stop these officers in the British Army from opening fire and killing several men, including Crispus Attucks, a mixed-race man who worked on the docks in Boston. In our second story, you might remember the woman that was wheeled down the alley and sexually assaulted by police officers. That was actually Rosa May Billinghurst. But that didn't happen last week or today. It happened 110 years ago in London at a women's suffrage movement, where a group of peaceful female protesters were physically attacked and groped during a march to the speaking program to talk about getting the right to vote. And finally, the last story, the one that I told you happened today, did happen today. It just happened in Los Angeles 50 years ago on August 29th, which is the day I'm recording this. That was Ruben Salazar, an LA Times reporter who had been reporting on the protests in Los Angeles and around California to engage the community and to get more rights for Latin American, Latino, and Chicanos here in California and across the country. He was sitting at the bar having dinner with a friend when police came to the door and fired tear gas canisters and a projectile that was designed to batter down the door. Unfortunately, they did it through a closed window and hit him in the side of the head, killing him instantly where he sat. He wasn't reporting, he wasn't protesting, and he certainly was not willingly participating in an unlawful assembly, despite the use of riot gear and tear gas to arrest the people that were in that building. Now, things have never been cut and dry. These incidents are still disputed, and police and protesters often have multiple versions of an event. This is normal, and the reason I make the point with these articles is not to highlight police brutality over the last few centuries. It is to highlight that there are always two different versions of a story, regardless of how deeply entrenched that story becomes in our American history. While the right to peaceful assembly has repeatedly been upheld, these events in history show that we have a completely lopsided set of expectations when we look at protests for police and the protesters that they're supposed to be protecting. This lopsided expectation continues today, as the law allows police to react with violence to limit the harm to citizens. However, it does not permit that for protesters. The law puts the onus on the protesters to somehow control the impulses of individuals in a crowd that could be thousands or 10, 15, 20. The only way, history shows us this over and over, to unequivocally control the story of your peaceful protest is to be peaceful. This is hard. This is unfair. And it's the law. Now, we look back at these specific incidents, the three that I went over and many others in our history, as transformational moments in our history as humans. We are celebrating the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, A massive protest that demonstrated that you can make incredible change and difference by engaging your government and by engaging the public in a peaceful, coordinated protest. That has not changed today. One other thing that hasn't changed is that after the March on Washington, Martin Luther King went down the street and he met with President Lyndon Johnson to talk about the importance of civil rights. We can protest. In fact, we should protest. The police should also be there. It is important that protesters and police alike fulfill their obligations under the law. You both have rights. You both have jobs to do. If you're out there protesting, do everything you can to be an example of what it looks like to be a responsible member in your community. You're not the only one there. You're surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people that are all watching. You also have thousands of people around the world that are watching what you're doing on social media. But really, really importantly, you are also going to encounter many, many police officers that are watching you very closely. And as long as protests in the United States give members of law enforcement reasons to follow through to protect the public from loss of property and harm to life, they will do that. Your job as the protester, our job as your community, whether we're standing next to you in the streets or whether we're standing at home talking about how to be safe while you go out and fulfill your right to peaceful protest, our job is to show you the support you need to be successful, to love you, to help you love the people around you so that you can be successful in the kind of social change that you're trying to accomplish. Without that, we don't have anything. Without community, there's nothing to protest for. Without laws, there is no protesting. And without police, there is no assured right to peaceful protest. It's on all of us, whether we wear a badge or we carry a sign. We are here to uphold the right to peaceful protest as delineated in the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We can do better than we have done. We can do better than we're doing today. And we have to. If you are going out to protest, or you're going out to work, and you're assigned to protect protesters as a police officer, please be safe. Please be kind. Please show love to the people around you. We want you to come home safe too. All of you. We'll see you soon.
The dominoes are falling on the news, and God don't feel a thing, he's found the booze. And I found my place staring through my shoes, while everybody else is making